I had a broken leg and simply asked my son-in-law to bring me a glass of water. He glanced at me and coldly said, "Get it yourself. I'm not your servant." My daughter sat just a few steps away and said nothing. I only smiled and tried to stand as if nothing had happened. But in that very moment, everything changed. That night I made one phone call, and within hours, everything he thought he controlled began to fall apart. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's story. If the opening caught your attention, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Just a quick note, some details in this story are adapted to enhance the experience, and any similarities are purely coincidental, but the message is something worth reflecting on. I broke my leg 45 days ago, and this morning I asked my son-in-law for a glass of water. What he said next would cost him everything he had. The afternoon light came through the living room windows at Blackwood Estate, casting long rectangles across the hardwood floor. I lay on the couch with my left leg elevated on two pillows, the cast heavy and itching in ways I couldn't reach. The television blared a pre-game show at a volume that treated the walls as suggestions rather than boundaries. Victor sat in the armchair near the window, the same armchair he had claimed 6 months after moving, in the one with the best view of the television and the worst view of anyone who might need something from him. He was 41 years old, built like a man who had once been athletic and now maintained the memory of it through expensive gym memberships he rarely used. His company, Vane Maritime Group, handled logistics for shipping clients up and down the eastern seaboard. At least that was what he told people at dinner parties. My throat was dry. The kitchen was 15 feet away. My crutches leaned against the arm of the couch within reach, but promising pain. "Victor," I said, "could you get me a glass of water?" He did not look away from the screen. The commentators argued about point spreads. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. "Victor." He turned then, and I saw something in his face I had been pretending not to notice for 2 years. Not irritation, not inconvenience. Dismissal. The look a man gives something he has already decided does not matter. "Get it yourself," he said. His voice was a growl, low and certain. "I am not your servant." Have you ever watched someone decide you do not matter anymore? Not guess it, not suspect it, but watch the exact moment they stop pretending. I watched it happen in my own living room. In the house my grandfather built, from a man who had lived under my roof for 26 months, and contributed nothing but opinions about how I should manage my property. The television kept blaring. Victor turned back to his pregame show. The matter was settled as far as he was concerned. Elena was at the kitchen table with her phone 12 feet away. My daughter, 38 years old, with her mother's eyes and her mother's silence. She had heard every word. I know she had because she looked up when Victor spoke. Her eyes met mine across the room. I saw something flicker there, something that might have been shame or might have been calculation. Then she looked back at her phone. Let me be clear about something. My daughter heard every word. 12 feet away. She looked up. She met my eyes. And then she looked back at her phone. That silence told me everything I needed to know about who she had chosen and what I had become in my own home. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not point out that I had paid for every wall, every window, every inch of the floor beneath his feet. I did not mention that he and Elena had moved in temporarily, after his business hit a rough patch and temporary had somehow stretched into years. Instead, I smiled. That is the part that matters. Not the pain in my leg, not the humiliation, not even Elena's silence, the smile. Because in that moment, something shifted. The performance I had been giving for months, the accommodating father, the grateful host, the man too old and too injured to notice what was happening in his own house, that performance ended. I reached for my crutches. The movement sent fire through my leg, but I had dealt with worse pain in my career. I positioned them under my arms and lifted myself from the couch. Each step was deliberate. Each step hurt. Victor did not offer to help. Elena did not look up from her phone. The kitchen tile was cool under my one bare foot. I filled a glass from the tap, the water running cold over my fingers, and I stood there drinking slowly, watching Victor's reflection in the window glass. He looked comfortable, settled, completely at ease in a house that was not his, watching a television I had paid for sitting in a chair he had claimed without asking. He had no idea who I was. Not really. He knew I was 68. He knew I was retired. He knew I had a broken leg and a daughter who had stopped defending me. He did not know what I had spent 35 years doing for a living. He did not know about the training, the cases, the hundreds of frauds I had dissected and exposed. He did not know that I had spent my entire career studying men exactly like him, men who smiled while they calculated who offered help while they positioned themselves to take. He was about to find out. I finished my water. I set the glass in the sink. The afternoon light was fading now, the rectangles on the floor growing long and thin. Victor laughed at something on the television. Elena tapped at her phone. I turned and made my slow way back toward the living room, toward the couch, toward the role I would keep playing until I was ready to stop. But as I passed behind Victor's chair, close enough to smell his cologne, I leaned down and whispered, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your life, son." He did not hear me. The television was too loud. But that was fine. He would understand soon enough. They both would. I made my way back to the couch that afternoon, lowered myself onto the cushions, and let the performance continue. Victor never turned around. He had no reason to. In his mind, the matter of the water was settled, the hierarchy established. He had no idea who he was dealing with. My name is Warren Lockwood. I am 68 years old, and for 35 years I made my living at National Maritime Insurance, reading the lies people bury in paperwork, the faked cargo manifests, the stage accidents, the convenient fires that always seem to start near the filing cabinets. I retired as senior insurance fraud inspector 3 years ago, and in that time I had identified over $400 million in fraudulent claims. I knew what deception looked like when it was dressed up in spreadsheets and sympathy. Blackwood Estate sits on 2 acres of James Island, about 20 minutes from downtown Charleston. My grandfather built the main house in 1952, and my father added the guest cottage and the private dock in the 70s. The property appraised at $1.5 million last year. Live oaks line the driveway, their branches heavy with Spanish moss. The wraparound porch faces east to catch the morning light. It is the kind of house that makes people pause when they drive by, the kind of house that makes certain people start calculating. 45 days before Victor told me to get my own water, I walked out the front door to get the morning paper. The January air was cool and damp, the way Charleston gets in winter. I stepped onto the porch, and my foot went out from under me before I could register what was happening. I want you to understand something about oil on wooden steps. It does not pool in a perfect oval. It does not stay contained. It spreads, finds the grain, follows the path of least resistance. Unless someone placed it there, unless someone wanted it found or wanted what would happen when it was stepped on. The patch I saw in the half second before I fell was too clean, too deliberate. The kind of detail that would have flagged an insurance claim in my old office. My leg hit the concrete walkway at the wrong angle. I heard the crack before I felt it. Then I felt it. Elena came running from the kitchen. My daughter is 38 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and what used to be her mother's stubborn independence. Before 5 years with Victor had taught her to move through rooms like someone who had memorized where all the sharp edges were. "Dad, are you okay?" She knelt beside me, her hands hovering over my leg like she was afraid to touch it. Victor appeared in the doorway. He stood 6'2", with the kind of handshake that crushed knuckles, and a laugh that filled rooms whether anyone had said something funny or not. 41 years old owner of Vane Maritime Group, and the man who had been systematically cataloging every valuable item in my house since the day he moved in. "I will call the ambulance," he said, but his eyes were not on my leg. They were scanning the entryway behind me, noting the craftsmanship of the crown molding and the value of my collection. He wasn't looking at a father-in-law in pain. He was surveying a portfolio he intended to liquidate. I noticed. I filed it away. I told myself I was being paranoid. Temporary? That word does a lot of heavy lifting in families. Temporary help. Temporary arrangement. Temporary until permanent becomes too obvious to name. 2 years earlier, Elena had made her pitch over Sunday dinner. "Dad, you're alone in that big house. What if we stayed for a while, help around the place?" Victor's company was going through a slow stretch, just temporary. The first 2 months were almost pleasant. Victor fixed the sagging gutter without being asked. He called me Warren with a friendliness that felt genuine. He brought home steaks on Fridays and grilled them on my back porch, while Elena set the table and we pretended we were a family that had always worked this way. Then the boundaries began dissolving, work boots tracking mud across the hardwood. The thermostat adjusted without asking. The living room becoming Victor's territory during football season. The volume climbing week by week until I started watching the evening news in my bedroom, in my own house. Then came the breakfast conversations. A place this size must cost a fortune to maintain, Warren. Victor said it casually, spreading butter on his toast, not looking up. If something happened to you, Elena would have a nightmare with probate. You know how these old properties get tied up in courts for years. Have you thought about putting the house in both your names, protection for everyone? I nodded and said I would think about it. And I did think about it. I thought about it the way I used to think about a tax return that came in too clean, too convenient with all the numbers lined up a little too neatly. I had spent 35 years identifying exactly that quality in financial records. The difference was that now I was living with it, eating breakfast across from it, watching it measure my house with a contractor's eye while I pretended not to notice. Victor was patient in a way that told me he had practiced this approach before. Find the vulnerable target, apply steady pressure, wait for them to stop pushing back. He spoke the language of someone building a case, assembling evidence, waiting for the right moment to present his findings. He had no idea that the night after he told me to get my own water, I would go to my study at 1 a.m. and do what I had done for 3 decades, follow the money, and what I found would make everything he had planned look like a child's game. Sleep does not come to people who have just discovered they are under siege in their own home. I lay on top of the covers until 1 a.m. organizing facts, the way I used to before a major audit. Every observation, every offhand comment, every red flag I had talked myself into ignoring. The water incident was not an isolated cruelty. It was a declaration. Victor had stopped pretending. At 1:10, I reached for my crutches and made my way to the study. My leg protested every step, but pain is just information, and I had spent 35 years working through worse distractions. The house was quiet. Victor's snoring rumbled faintly from the guest room upstairs. Elena slept beside him, or pretended to. I closed the study door behind me and turned on my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. I typed in the address for the South Carolina Secretary of State Business Registry, the first stop in any financial investigation. The page loaded halfway and then froze. I tried the IRS Public Records Portal. Same result. The Charleston County Property Records Database. Blocked. I sat back in my chair and let the realization settle over me like cold water. Victor had quietly limited access on my home network, just enough to make certain sites unreliable, just enough to keep me from asking the wrong questions. He had done this in my house using equipment I paid for without saying a word. Let me explain something about network restrictions to those who do not spend their careers in fraud investigation. They are locks, and locks only work on people who do not know how to pick them. Victor had installed a deadbolt on my digital front door. He did not know I had spent 3 decades walking through walls. I opened a command prompt and began typing. The techniques were not complicated for anyone who had tracked fraudsters through corporate firewalls and encrypted servers. Within 10 minutes, I had bypassed his restrictions entirely. The Secretary of State portal loaded without hesitation. I typed in Vane Maritime Group LLC and pressed enter. The results populated my screen. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the carafe I had brought from the kitchen and began to read. Vane Maritime Group had been incorporated in South Carolina 7 years ago. Victor Staunton listed as sole owner and registered agent. Business purpose logistics and freight coordination for maritime shipping. The company had filed annual reports every year, all showing healthy activity. Contract revenue for the past 2 years totaled $4.5 million. Declared profit, 0. Not losses, 0. I set down my coffee cup. In 35 years of examining fraudulent claims, I had learned that numbers tell stories. A company pulling in $4.5 million in revenue does not report 0 profit by accident. That kind of gap does not come from bad management or market conditions. That gap comes from money going somewhere it is not being reported. Either Victor was hiding income from the IRS, or he was bleeding money faster than he could earn it. Either way, the picture of the successful businessman who just needed temporary help was a lie. I kept digging, corporate filings, registered addresses, officer information. Then I stopped typing. The registered agent address for Vane Maritime Group, LLC, was 2847 Folly Road, James Island, South Carolina. Blackwood Estate, my home, my address. Listed as the official business address for Victor's company without my knowledge, without my consent, without a single conversation about it. Do you know what happens when someone registers a business at your address without your permission? Every lawsuit, every collection, notice every threatening letter from the IRS comes to your mailbox. And if the person checking that mailbox is not you, those letters disappear. The debts pile up. The legal notices go unanswered. And the actual homeowner has no idea that their property is being used as a shield for someone else's collapse. I pushed back from the desk and limped to the closet where I kept old files and recycling. Elena had emptied the guest room trash here last week. I had not thought anything of it at the time. Now I dug through the bin with methodical precision, separating junk mail from anything with Vane Maritime's name. The first envelope was marked Final Notice in red letters. Debt Collection Agency. Amount owed $47,000. The second was from a law firm in Atlanta. Breach of contract lawsuit. Damages sought $115,000. The third was from the Internal Revenue Service. Notice of underpayment. Amount in question $230,000. I kept sorting. Letter after letter. Creditor after creditor. The stack grew until it covered half my desk. $890,000. That is not a slow stretch. That is not a rough patch in the logistics business. That is a man drowning grabbing for anything that floats. And he had decided my house was his life raft. I spread the letters across my desk like evidence in a case file because that is what they were now. Vane Maritime Group was hemorrhaging money. Victor was drowning in debt. And he had chosen my home as the address to hide it all from creditors, from the IRS, from anyone who might come looking for the money he owed. The clock on my desk read 4:30. Dawn was an hour away. I had enough evidence to confront him. I had enough evidence to call a lawyer. I had enough evidence to go to the authorities. But standing there in the gray light of early morning, I did not know the worst part yet. The financial fraud was bad enough. What he was putting in my coffee every morning was worse. A few days after the midnight investigation, it was not the numbers keeping me awake anymore. It was my own body. Something was wrong, something I could not blame on age or stress or a broken leg. My thoughts moved like they were wading through honey. Words I had known for 60 years would vanish mid-sentence. And every morning Victor handed me my supplements with a smile. The fog had been rolling in for weeks, but I had blamed it on everything except what it actually was. Sleep deprivation, the stress of the water incident, the trauma of discovering $890,000 in hidden debts. I told myself it would pass. It did not pass. I reached for the word breakfast and found nothing. Just an empty space where the word should have been. I walked into my study to get a book and stood there for 30 seconds, unable to remember why I had come. I asked Elena what time dinner was, and 10 minutes later asked her again, not remembering her answer, or that I had asked at all. Let me tell you what it feels like when your own mind becomes unfamiliar territory. You reach for a word you have used 10,000 times, and it is gone. You walk into a room and forget why. You look at your daughter, and for half a second, just half a second, her name does not come. That is not aging. That is not stress. That is chemistry doing something to your brain that your brain did not agree to. I sat in my study on a Tuesday afternoon, the fog thicker than it had been all week, and I forced myself to think backwards. When had this started? When had the reliable machinery of my mind begun slipping its gears? 3 months ago. October. Right around the time Victor started giving me supplements. For bone healing, he had said, holding out the bottle with that helpful smile. For recovery. For health. 2 pills every morning with breakfast. 2 more every evening with dinner. I had taken them obediently, grateful for my son-in-law's concern, grateful that someone in this house seemed to care about my well-being. I had been a fool. I had seen this play before. The same script, different actors. At National Maritime, I investigated elder financial abuse cases for over a decade. The pattern was always the same. Elderly parent starts declining. Family expresses concern. Medical evaluations get scheduled, documenting the confusion, the memory gaps, the difficulty with familiar tasks. Power of attorney gets signed over to the helpful caregiver. And by the time anyone realizes what happened, the confused old person is in a facility, and the house belongs to someone else. Create the appearance of incompetence. Document the symptoms, then take everything. Victor was not just stealing my property. He was trying to steal my mind first. That evening I went to the bathroom before dinner and locked the door behind me. Victor had already laid out my supplements on the kitchen counter, 2 small pills beside my water glass. I picked them up as I walked past, thanking him, and carried them with me. In the bathroom I examined them under the light. Small, white, no markings I could identify. They could have been vitamins. They could have been anything. I placed them in my palm and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at me was tired, yes, older than I sometimes remembered, but the eyes were clear now, clearer than they had been in weeks. I did not swallow the pills. I wrapped them in a tissue and placed them in my pocket. That night I addressed a plain white envelope to an independent toxicology laboratory in Colombia. I had used them before on insurance cases when claimants needed objective analysis that would hold up in court. I placed the pills inside with a short note requesting a full chemical analysis. I sealed the envelope and hid it in my desk drawer. The next morning, Victor asked if I had taken my supplements. I smiled at him, thanked him, told him he was so thoughtful to worry about my health, and I meant none of it. For the first time in 2 years, I was not the one being played. I mailed the envelope that afternoon while Victor was on a phone call in the driveway, pacing the way he always did when money was the topic. His voice carried through the window, tense and clipped, promising someone that the payment would come next week. I limped to the mailbox at the end of the drive and raised the red flag. The results would take a week. In the meantime, I had a role to play. I misplaced my keys on purpose, then made a show of searching for them. I asked Elena what day it was, even though I knew perfectly well it was Thursday. I let my eyes go unfocused when Victor talked about the house, about maintenance costs, about how complicated probate could be for properties this size. I nodded slowly, as if processing his words through cotton. Victor watched me with barely concealed satisfaction. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he exchanged glances with Elena when he thought I was not looking. He believed he was watching his plan succeed. He believed the supplements were working, that my mind was softening, like fruit left too long in the sun, that soon I would be confused enough to sign whatever he put in front of me. He had no idea I was already on the phone with an attorney. He had no idea that while he watched me fumble with my reading glasses, I was building a case that would end him. He had no idea that the confused old man he saw shuffling through the house was the most dangerous person in it. Patience, I had learned, was just another form of violence, and I had 35 years of practice. The envelope from the toxicology lab arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a credit card offer and a charity solicitation. Plain white. No return address that would mean anything to someone intercepting mail. I had been watching for it every day, checking the mailbox before Victor could get to it, and when I finally held it in my hands, I felt nothing but cold clarity. I waited until Victor left for his morning meetings, the ones that had become more frequent. As his debts grew and his creditors circled closer, Elena was upstairs doing something on her laptop. I went to my study, closed the door, and opened the envelope with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. The report was 3 pages of clinical language and chemical notation. I read past the methodology section, past the chain of custody documentation, until I reached the findings. Analysis indicates presence of benzodiazepine compounds at concentrations consistent with pharmaceutical profiles, used to induce symptoms mimicking early onset dementia. I read the words twice, then a third time. Then I set the report down on my desk and stared at the wall, where my grandfather's portrait hung the man who had built this house with his own hands in 1952. benzodiazepines, sedatives, at doses calibrated not to knock me unconscious but to slow my thoughts, blur my memory, make me fumble for words I had known my entire life. Victor had not been helping me heal. He had been erasing me one pill at a time. I want you to understand what it means to read a document that confirms someone is trying to unmake you, not kill you. That would be too obvious, too traceable, too likely to trigger an investigation. Victor was smarter than that. He was trying to make me disappear while I was still breathing, turn me into someone who could not manage his own affairs, could not be trusted with his own decisions, could not be left alone in his own house. Create the incompetent old man. Document the decline. Then take everything. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Drug me into apparent dementia. Arrange for a medical evaluation by a doctor sympathetic to Victor's concerns about his poor father-in-law. Obtain guardianship through the courts with Elena's reluctant testimony about my deterioration. Take control of the house, the accounts, the legacy. By the time anyone realized what had happened, I would be in a memory care facility, and Blackwood Estate would belong to someone else. I sat with this knowledge for a long time. The coffee I had poured before opening the envelope went cold. The morning light shifted across my desk. I listened to the house settle around me, the creaks and groans of a structure that had sheltered my family for 7 decades. What would you do? Confront him? Call the police? Show Elena the report and demand she choose between her husband and her father. I had spent 35 years watching people make exactly those mistakes, acting on emotion, showing their hand too early, letting the target know they were being investigated. The ones who won were the ones who waited, the ones who built their case, the ones who let the other person believe they were winning right up until the moment they were not. I made my decision. I would continue the performance. Every morning, Victor would hand me my supplements, and I would thank him for his concern. I would palm the pills and dispose of them later. And then I would give him exactly the declining father-in-law he had been trying to create. Misplaced keys, repeated questions, moments of apparent confusion. I would manufacture my own symptoms better than his drugs ever could, and I would watch him document each one with satisfaction. While he watched his plan succeed, I would be building the case that would destroy him. That evening I set my reading glasses on the kitchen counter and walked away. I did not need them to see. I needed Victor to find them. An hour later his voice came from the kitchen with careful patience. "Warren, you left these in the kitchen again." He held up the glasses, his expression that perfect mixture of concern and condescension that I had come to recognize as his documentation face. He was probably making mental notes for whatever physician he planned to bring in for my evaluation. "Thank you," I said, taking them from his hand. "I do not know what is happening to me lately." Victor nodded slowly, the way people nod when they want to appear sympathetic, but are really thinking about something else entirely. "We should probably talk to your doctor about these memory issues, Warren. It's nothing to be ashamed of." I agreed that yes, we probably should. Then I shuffled back to my study, leaning on my crutches more heavily than necessary, and I closed the door behind me. I knew exactly what was happening, and now so would my attorney. I filed the toxicology report in my study safe behind the vintage Mont Blanc pen collection that Victor had been cataloging since the day he moved in. I had the financial evidence now. $4.5 million in revenue with zero declared profit, $890,000 in hidden debts, mail fraud using my address without consent, and I had the physical evidence. Documented proof of pharmaceutical assault, laboratory certified, legally admissible. Now I needed a fortress. The next morning I told Elena I had a doctor's appointment at 10. She offered to drive me, but I said I had already called a car service. She did not push. She rarely pushed anymore. What I had was not a medical appointment. What I had was a meeting at 188 Meeting Street with an estate attorney named Margot Sinclair. And what I was going to build was a legal structure that would put Blackwood Estate somewhere Victor Stanton could never reach it, no matter how many pills he fed me or how many symptoms I pretended to have. The confused old man was about to become very difficult to rob. I made the call from the kitchen loud enough for Victor to hear from the living room. "Yes, I would like to schedule an appointment. Dr. Patterson's office Tuesday at 10 would be fine. Thank you so much." There was no Dr. Patterson, there was Margot Sinclair, attorney, at law, 188 Meeting Street, 4th floor. And Tuesday at 10 would be the hour I started taking my house back. Victor glanced up from his phone as I ended the call. "Everything okay, Warren?" "Just a checkup," I said. "The doctor wants to run some tests. Make sure my memory issues are not anything serious." He nodded with that concerned expression he had perfected over 2 years. "That is probably a good idea. We have all been a little worried about you." I thanked him for his concern and shuffled back toward my study. Behind me, I heard him return to whatever he had been doing on his phone, probably documenting my latest symptom. Tuesday morning, I took a car service to Meeting Street. My leg was out of the cast, now fitted with a walking boot that made stairs manageable but not graceful. The driver dropped me in front of a brick building with brass numbers beside the door. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. Margot Sinclair rose from behind her desk when I entered. 52 years old, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical twist. No framed diplomas cluttering her walls, because she had stopped needing to prove herself to anyone about 15 years ago. Her office was clean lines and natural light, a single orchid on the windowsill, and stacks of files that suggested she had more clients than wall space. Let me tell you something about attorneys who do not hang diplomas on their walls. They are either failures or they are so good they do not need the validation. Margot Sinclair was the second kind. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and brief, the handshake of someone who did not waste time on performances. "Mr. Lockwood, please sit down. Tell me what brings you in today." I sat. I opened the folder I had carried with me from Blackwood Estate and began laying documents across her desk. The vain maritime business filing showing $4.5 million in revenue and zero profit. The stack of collection notices totaling $890,000, all addressed to my home without my knowledge. The registered agent documentation proving Victor had used my address for his failing company. And finally, the toxicology report. Margot read each document without expression. When she reached the lab results, she read them twice. Then she set them down and looked at me with eyes that had seen worse but not often. "Mr. Lockwood, what you are describing is financial fraud, mail fraud, and assault. Have you considered going to the police?" "I have spent 35 years investigating fraud," I said. "Premature action destroys cases. Right now, my son-in-law believes his plan is working. He believes I am declining. He believes he will have guardianship by summer and control of my property shortly after. I need him to keep believing that until I have built a case so complete that no attorney in South Carolina will be able to help him." Margot nodded slowly. She understood. "What do you want from me?" "Protection for the house. Something that makes it impossible for him to take, even if he gets guardianship. Something that keeps Blackwood Estate in my family no matter what paperwork he files." "A revocable living trust," she said. "You transfer the property into the trust name yourself as trustee and sole beneficiary. You retain complete control, can modify or dissolve it at any time, but the title is held by the trust entity rather than by you personally. Any attempt to alter that arrangement without your explicit consent runs into South Carolina trust law, which is considerably offering stronger statutory protection against guardianship-based asset seizures than individual ownership. A revocable living trust is a fortress with invisible walls. It would not make me untouchable, but it would make his job nearly impossible. From the outside, nothing changes. Same house, same address, same old man shuffling on the porch. But the title belongs to an entity that does not have dementia, cannot be manipulated, and does not care how many supplements Victor puts in the morning coffee. I wrote her a check for $3,200. The paperwork would be ready within the week. I returned home that afternoon and resumed my performance with renewed commitment. I could not find my wallet. I asked Elena what day it was, then asked again 20 minutes later. Victor watched from the kitchen doorway with barely concealed satisfaction, his phone in his hand, probably making notes about my deteriorating condition. That evening I sat in my study pretending to read while Victor took a phone call on the back porch. The door was not fully closed. Through the gap, I heard fragments of conversation that made my blood run cold, even as they confirmed everything I suspected. Accelerating the timeline, Victor said, "The property question needs to be resolved before summer. Yes, the supplements are working. He asked me the same question 3 times today. The supplements are working. I heard those words through a door that was not quite closed, spoken by a man who thought he was winning. He had no idea that the supplements had stopped working the day I started flushing them down the toilet. He was building a case against a man who did not exist. Victor ended his call and came back inside his face, arranged in the concerned mask he wore so well. "Warren, are you feeling okay? You seem tired." "Just a long day," I said. "The doctor says I need more rest." He nodded sympathetically, already planning his next move. What he did not know was that the trust documents would be ready in 4 days. What he did not know was that I had a recording device in my shirt pocket capturing every concerned word he spoke. And what he definitely did not know was that in 2 days, he was going to sit across from me at dinner and make the biggest mistake since telling me to get my own water. Victor waited until we were all seated at the dining table before he produced the documents. He had been planning this moment. The lighting was soft. Elena had made pot roast, and there between the salt shaker and the bread basket sat a stack of papers that would have signed away my life if I had not been expecting them. "Warren," Victor said, setting down his fork with the gravity of a man about to deliver difficult news, "we need to discuss your situation. I have prepared some documents that will help protect everyone." I looked at the papers but did not touch them. "What kind of documents?" "Power of attorney." He said it like he was offering me a gift. "It is just a precaution. You have been forgetful lately. We have all noticed." Elena sat very still across the table. She had not taken a bite since Victor started speaking. And if I do not want to sign, that was when Victor's mask slipped. Not all at once. It came apart in pieces like plaster cracking off a wall. His expression shifted from concerned son-in-law to something harder, something that had been waiting underneath for 2 years. "Then we will have to discuss other options." His voice dropped the pretense of warmth. "There are facilities that specialize in cases like yours. Elena and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider your long-term care needs. Have you ever watched someone you thought you knew become a stranger in the space of a single sentence?" Victor had spent 2 years building the character of the helpful son-in-law. It took him 30 seconds to tear down the mask. Burden. He called me a burden. In my own dining room, at my own table, eating food I paid for. "Are you threatening me, Victor?" "I am trying to help you, Warren. Whether you see it that way is up to you." He pushed the papers closer to me. "But we need to resolve the situation with this house. A property this size in your condition, it is not safe. It is not responsible. And frankly, it is not fair to Elena and me to keep pretending everything is fine." Elena's face had gone pale. She was watching her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. Maybe she was. "I want you to understand what it took not to react. 35 years of professional discipline, the knowledge that the recording device in my pocket was capturing every threat, the certainty that the documents he was waving would never be signed, because the house he thought he was claiming already belonged to a trust he did not know existed. I sat there and let him threaten me, and I smiled. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "Let me think about it." Victor's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but not calm. He had expected a confused old man to fold under pressure. "Think about it quickly. I have already made some calls. The facility I found has an opening next week." Elena spoke for the first time. Victor. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He turned to her with the impatient expression of someone whose script was not being followed. "What?" She did not finish whatever she was going to say. She just shook her head and looked down at her plate. But I saw her hands trembling. Dinner ended shortly after that. Victor gathered his unsigned documents and retreated to the guest room. Elena cleared the dishes without meeting my eyes. I went to my study and closed the door. The recording device had captured everything. Several days later, I sat at my desk and dialed a number I had not used in 12 years. Curtis Redmond answered on the third ring. He was 36 now, a special agent with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. But I still remembered him as the 24-year-old claims analyst I had spent 2 years teaching to see what insurance fraudsters did not want him to see. "Mr. Lockwood," his voice carried surprise and something that sounded like respect. "It has been a long time. Curtis, I need 10 minutes. Not as a favor, as a professional consultation." "I am listening." Calling Curtis Redmond was like lighting a fuse. I did not know how long the fuse was or exactly what it would ignite, but I knew this federal investigations do not stop. They do not negotiate. They do not care how charming you are at dinner parties. Once the machinery starts moving, it moves until it finds what it is looking for, or until it finds something worse. I laid out the evidence, the $4.5 million in revenue at Vane Maritime with zero declared profit, the $890,000 in hidden debts, the mail fraud using my address, the pattern of financial manipulation that suggested insurance fraud through falsified cargo claims. I did not mention the poisoning, one front at a time. Curtis listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Send me what you have," he said finally. "Officially, I am not making commitments, but what you are describing falls within a range that would typically warrant a preliminary review." "How long?" "I cannot give you timelines, but when documentation reaches the threshold for referral, the process moves on its own schedule." I thanked him and hung up. The fuse was lit. Several days later, Curtis called back. What I sent him had crossed the threshold for a formal preliminary review. The revenue discrepancy at Vane Maritime was now officially a federal matter. I thanked him again and set down the phone. Downstairs, I could hear Victor on a call, with someone his voice tight with frustration. He was talking about a lawsuit, something about equitable interest and garage renovations. He was going to take me to court. I almost laughed. He thought he was going on the offensive. He thought filing a lawsuit would pressure me into settling into signing over what he wanted. He had no idea that the federal government was now reviewing his company's financial records. He had no idea what court was about to do to him. Margot Sinclair called on a Wednesday morning with the tone of voice attorneys use when they have both bad news and good news. "Mr. Lockwood, I received a filing this morning from Gerald Odom's office. Your son-in-law has retained counsel and filed a civil claim against you." I sat down in my study chair and waited. I had expected this. I had not expected to be so calm about it. Gerald Odom from Odom and Associates. I learned later that Odom had asked for a $15,000 cash retainer, which told me everything I needed to know about what he thought of his client's financial stability. Attorneys who believe in their cases work on contingency. Attorneys who want to get paid before the case falls apart demand cash up front. "What is he claiming?" I asked. "Equitable interest in the property." Margot's voice was measured professional. "He alleges that he personally invested $115,000 in improvements to Blackwood Estate, specifically the garage renovation completed 2 years ago. He claims this personal financial contribution entitles him to either restitution or partial ownership interest in the property. $115,000. The garage renovation had been Victor's project from the beginning. New doors, climate control, reinforced flooring for his truck. I had not asked questions at the time. I should have. Here's what Victor Stanton clearly did not understand about civil litigation. When you file a claim, you have to prove your claim. You have to submit evidence. And that evidence becomes part of the court record. It becomes discoverable. It becomes something the other side can use against you. Victor had just filed receipts proving that his company paid for the garage renovation. His company, not him. And that distinction was about to matter more than he could possibly imagine. "Margot," I said, "read me the exhibits." The exhibits. The receipts. The evidence of his personal financial contribution. Read me what his attorney attached. I heard papers rustling on her end. They are attached as Exhibit B, contractor invoices materials. Receipts permit applications. Total documented expenditure of $114,862. The name on the receipts. Who are they issued to? A pause. I could almost hear her reading more carefully now. Vane Maritime Group LLC. Not Victor Stanton personally. No, the LLC. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I explained what I had spent 35 years learning to see. An LLC expenditure is not a personal investment, Margot. The corporate veil exists precisely to prevent this kind of conflation. Victor cannot claim personal interest in property based on payments made by his company. His attorney just submitted exhibits that prove our argument for us. In fraud investigation, we call this stepping on your own trap. You set up an elaborate scheme, you think you have covered every angle, and then you file paperwork that exposes the entire operation. Victor wanted a fight in court. He was about to discover what court does to people who cannot keep their business expenses separate from their personal claims. Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was a short laugh, professional but genuine. Mr. Lockwood, I have been practicing law for 23 years. I do not often see opposing counsel hand me the case on a silver platter. His attorney should have caught it. His attorney took $15,000 in cash and filed whatever his client told him to file. That is not the same as practicing law. I thought about the receipts, about the $115,000 that Vane Maritime had apparently spent on my garage, the same company that showed $4.5 million in revenue and zero profit, the same company that owed $890,000 to creditors, the same company that was now under federal review, $115,000. That was what Victor claimed he had personally invested. The receipts said Vane Maritime Group LLC. And where did Vane Maritime get $115,000 for a garage renovation when the company was showing zero profit on millions in revenue? That question was about to become very interesting to a federal judge. Margot, I said, can you file a motion to dismiss? I can do better than that. I can file a motion to dismiss with a request for sanctions. Frivolous filing. His own exhibits prove the claim has no legal basis. The court will not look kindly on wasting its time. How long? Motion filed by Friday. Hearings scheduled within 2 weeks depending on the court calendar. And Mr. Lockwood, when we win, and we will win, I am going to request that he be ordered to pay your legal fees. I thanked her and hung up. Through the study window, I could see Victor's truck in the driveway. He was inside the house somewhere, probably celebrating what he thought was a brilliant legal maneuver. He had hired an attorney. He had filed paperwork. He was fighting back. He did not know that the receipts he submitted would lead directly to questions about where Vane Maritime's money came from. He did not know that Curtis Redmond was already reviewing those same financial discrepancies at the federal level. He did not know that in 2 weeks he would be standing in a courtroom watching a judge dismiss his claim and order him to pay my legal fees. And he definitely did not know what I was going to do tonight. My daughter had been avoiding me since the dinner confrontation. She moved through the house like a ghost, never quite meeting my eyes, never quite alone long enough for a real conversation. She had watched her husband threaten me with a nursing home. She had seen his mask slip, and she had said nothing since. Tonight I was going to show her exactly who she had married. The toxicology report, the recording of Victor's threats, the financial records, the mail fraud, all of it. She deserved to know the truth, and I deserved to know whose side she would choose when she finally understood what was at stake. The Charleston County Courthouse has high ceilings and dark wood paneling, and the particular quiet that comes from 2 centuries of judgment being rendered. I walked through the doors with Margot Sinclair beside me, my legs still aching, but my crutches left at home. Victor was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Gerald Odom, both of them looking confident, in a way that told me they had not read their own exhibits carefully enough. The hearing began with Odom presenting Victor's claim, $115,000 in personal contributions to property improvements, equitable interest based on substantial financial investment. He spoke with the practiced rhythm of a man who had given this speech before, probably in cases where the facts were actually on his side. Then Margot rose. Your Honor, she said, I would like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit B, submitted by the plaintiff, as evidence of his personal financial contribution. She walked the judge through the receipts one by one. Contractor invoices, materials purchases, permit applications, every document Victor's attorney had submitted to prove his case. Your Honor, every receipt in this exhibit is issued to Vane Maritime Group, LLC, not to Victor Stanton personally. Under South Carolina corporate law, an expenditure by a limited liability company cannot be claimed as a personal investment by its owner. The corporate veil exists precisely to prevent this conflation. This is what it looks like when a man realizes he has destroyed himself. Victor's face went through several expressions in quick succession when Margot continued speaking. Surprise, calculation, fear, and finally something that looked like the beginning of understanding that he had filed paperwork that would lead investigators directly to his financial irregularities. Additionally, Margot said, her voice calm and measured, "We have reason to believe the source of these LLC funds is currently under federal review for potential fraud related to diverted insurance settlements." Odom jumped to his feet. "Objection, relevance." The judge looked at him with the patience of someone who had seen this maneuver before. Overruled. The source of funds claimed as personal investment is directly relevant to the validity of the claim. Continue, Mrs. Sinclair. Margot continued. She explained that Victor had submitted evidence proving our argument for us. She requested dismissal with sanctions for frivolous filing. She requested attorney's fees. The judge did not need long to decide. The claim is dismissed as procedurally deficient. Mr. Stanton is ordered to pay defendants' legal costs in the amount of $15,000. The court notes that plaintiff's counsel should have identified this deficiency before filing. Victor stood frozen at the plaintiff's table. His attorney was already gathering papers with the quick movements of a man calculating how fast he could distance himself from this client. They walked out of the courthouse separately. I noticed Odom did not shake Victor's hand. "Before I tell you what happened next, if you're still here with me, leave a comment and choose one, type 1 if you trust Elena, or 2 if you think she will betray him." And just a quick note, the next part includes some adapted details for storytelling, so if that's not for you, feel free to stop here. The kitchen was dark when I got home that evening. Elena was sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her hands wrapped around it like she had forgotten it was there. She looked up when I came in, and for a moment she was the girl I taught to fly fish on the Kiowa River, the one who stood in the shallows for 3 hours refusing to quit. That girl was still in there. She was ready to see the truth. "Dad?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What is happening? What do you know that I do not?" I sat down across from her. The house was quiet around us. Victor was somewhere else, probably nursing his wounds from the courthouse. "Elena, I need to show you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." I went to my study and retrieved the toxicology report. I placed it on the table between us. "What is this?" "A toxicology report. The supplements Victor has been giving me contain sedatives, high doses, designed to mimic early-onset dementia." She stared at the paper like it might bite her. That cannot be true. I did not argue with her. Instead, I took out my phone and found the recording from the dinner confrontation. I pressed play. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I watched my daughter's face as she listened to her husband calling her father a burden, as she heard him discussing how to accelerate the timeline on the property question, as she heard him say the supplements were working, as she understood word by word that the man sleeping beside her had been planning to steal her childhood home, while chemically erasing her father's mind. Her hands started shaking at the 2-minute mark. They did not stop. When the recording ended, Elena sat without moving for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The evening settled around us. Outside, I could hear crickets beginning their night chorus, indifferent to what was happening inside these walls. Then she looked at me with eyes that had lost something and gained something else entirely. The confusion was gone. The denial was gone. What remained was clarity, sharp and painful. She said one word. "Everything." I waited. "I need to know everything," she said. "Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence you have. I need to know exactly what he has done and exactly what we are going to do about it." I realized then that my daughter, the one I had been protecting and hiding the truth from, was ready to fight. She had spent 2 years moving through her own house like someone who had memorized where all the sharp edges were. She had stayed silent when Victor told me to get my own water. She had watched from the kitchen table while her father struggled to the sink on crutches. But that woman was gone now. The one looking at me across the kitchen table was someone else. Someone who had just discovered that her marriage was a long-term heist, and she had been the unwitting accomplice. What happened next would determine whether Victor Stanton spent the rest of his life in prison or merely lost everything he had tried to steal. Victor came home the next evening to find his suitcases in the hallway. Elena stood at the top of the stairs with an expression I had never seen on my daughter's face before. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was the particular calm of someone who has made a decision and will not be moved from it. She had her mother's stubbornness, after all. It had just been sleeping. Elena Victor said, his voice dropping into that lower register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "We need to talk about this. There has been a misunderstanding. I found the toxicology report." Elena's voice was flat matter-of-fact. "I heard the recording." Victor's face shifted. He tried a different approach, stepping toward the stairs with his hands raised in a gesture of openness. "That recording is out of context. Your father has been confused lately, and I was just trying to protect everyone. You know how much I care about this family. Get out of my father's house." "Elena, please. Let me explain what was really happening. Your father does not understand the situation, and I think if we all sat down together and talked through this calmly. The guest cottage. Tonight. Do not come back to the main house without permission." I watched from the study doorway as my daughter became someone I remembered. The girl who argued with teachers not to be difficult, but because she wanted to understand. The woman who had stood in a river for 3 hours, refusing to quit. Victor kept trying to explain. Elena kept saying the same words, "Get out." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Victor looked at me, then back at Elena, then at the suitcases. For a moment I thought he might argue further. Instead, he picked up his bags and walked out the front door down the path toward the guest cottage at the back of the property. The man who thought he was weeks away from owning Blackwood Estate was now sleeping in the cottage behind it. 2 days later, I was organizing documents in my study when I found the folder. It was tucked between old tax returns, a manila envelope I did not recognize. I opened it expecting receipts or insurance paperwork. What I found stopped my breath. Medical reports, 3 of them, each one describing cognitive decline, memory issues, increasing confusion, each one recommending evaluation for guardianship. My signature. On a medical report I never saw from a doctor I never visited, describing symptoms I never had. Victor had not just been planning to take my house. He had been planning to take my identity, my competence, my right to make my own decisions, and he had been doing it for months, carefully, patiently, one forged document at a time. There was a note clipped to the reports, an appointment scheduled with something called Palmetto Senior Evaluation Services for the following week. A private evaluator, someone who would presumably provide the convenient diagnosis Victor needed to file for guardianship. I sat in my study chair and let the full scope of the betrayal wash over me. The supplements were bad enough. The financial fraud was bad enough. But this was identity theft. This was fraud on a different level. This was federal crime. I spent the next 3 days doing what I had done hundreds of times in my career, building a case. 40 pages. That is what 35 years of fraud investigation comes down to when you apply it to your own family. 40 pages of documented betrayal, cross-referenced and annotated, formatted exactly the way I used to format case files for federal referral. I included everything. The vain maritime financial records showing $4.5 million in revenue and 0 profit. The $890,000 in hidden debts. The mail fraud using my address as the registered agent for a failing company without my consent. The intercepted correspondence I had found in the study closet. The toxicology report proving pharmaceutical assault. The recording from the coercion dinner. And now the forged medical documents. I included timeline analysis. I included cross-references showing how each piece of evidence connected to the others. I included source documentation for every claim. On Thursday afternoon, I called Curtis Redmond. "Curtis," I said when he answered, "I am sending you an updated package. 40 pages, everything documented." There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Lockwood, what you are describing now goes beyond financial fraud." "I know, identity theft. Forged medical documents. He was building a guardianship case using my forged signature." Another pause. "Send everything. I will make sure it reaches the right people." I sent the package that afternoon. By Friday morning, Curtis called back. His voice had changed. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by something that sounded like urgency. "Mr. Lockwood, the evidence has reached the threshold for formal investigation. A federal judge will be reviewing the materials." I waited. There was something else in his voice. "There is one more thing," he said. The private evaluation service in your documents. Palmetto Senior Evaluation Services. It has appeared in 3 other guardianship cases in the past 2 years, all of them involving elderly property owners, all of them with similar patterns of manufactured incompetence. I felt the floor shift beneath me. Victor had not invented this scheme. He had hired someone who specialized in it. Mr. Lockwood Curtis continued, "Your son-in-law may have stumbled into something larger than a single family dispute. The federal investigation has just expanded." I thanked him and hung up. Through my study window, I could see the guest cottage. The lights were on. Victor was in there, probably pacing, probably planning his next move, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea that a warrant with his name on it was being drafted. He had no idea that his connection to Palmetto Senior Evaluation Services had just made him part of a much larger federal inquiry. And he definitely had no idea that within the week agents would be executing that warrant while he slept in the cottage behind the house he had tried to steal. After several days of federal review, Curtis called at 6 in the evening with 3 words: "It is done." A federal judge had signed the warrant an hour ago. Agents would execute at dawn simultaneous raids on the guest cottage at Blackwood Estate and the Vane Maritime Group offices on East Bay Street. I thanked him and hung up. Then I went to the back porch and sat in my chair and watched the guest cottage, where Victor Stanton was spending his last night as a free man. The lights were on. He was probably in there making phone calls, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his lawsuit, completely unaware of what was coming. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because some moments deserved to be fully witnessed. I sat on the back porch and watched the guest cottage lights flicker. Victor was in there, probably sleeping without a care in the world, dreaming of appeals and legal strategies. I drank my coffee and watched the stars fade and waited for dawn to bring the ending he had earned. The first light came around 5:30. Gray at first, then pink along the eastern horizon. I heard the vehicles before I saw them. 3 dark SUVs coming down Folly Road, turning into the driveway without sirens, but with purpose. I want you to understand what it looks like when a 2-year scheme collapses in a single morning. Victor came out of the guest cottage in a bathrobe, unshaven, squinting at the agents, like they were a dream he could not wake from. Federal agents and windbreakers surrounded the cottage while one of them read from the warrant. "Victor Stanton, federal agents. We have a warrant to search the premises. There must be some mistake." Victor's voice carried across the yard to where I sat on the porch. "I need to call my attorney." "You can call your attorney from the field office." "Step aside, sir." He kept saying there must be a mistake. There was no mistake. The mistake was his, and it had been made a long time ago when he decided to treat an old man on crutches as someone who would not fight back. I watched them search the cottage. I watched them load boxes of documents into one of the SUVs. Somewhere across town, a second team was doing the same thing at the Vane Maritime offices, seizing computers and phones and whatever shadow servers Victor had been operating. The logistics company that showed $4.5 million in revenue and 0 profit was now under full federal review, its records being taken apart one hard drive at a time. Victor stood in the driveway in his bathrobe, watched by an agent who had no interest in conversation. His face cycled through confusion, denial, and finally the beginning of understanding. He looked toward the main house. He saw me sitting on the porch with my coffee. For a long moment, our eyes met. I raised my cup in a small salute. He looked away. The agents finished their search and drove away with Victor for processing. He would be released pending formal charges. That was the way these things worked. But I knew Victor. Desperate people do not wait for consequences, they try to erase them. And I knew he would try something. That night he did. I was in my bedroom when I heard the back door open. It was after midnight. Elena was asleep in her old room. The guest cottage was dark. Victor should have been there waiting for his attorney to arrange bail conditions. Instead, he was in my house. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down into the hallway. The study door was open. The light was on. I could hear drawers being opened and papers being shuffled. No crutches. I stood at the top of the stairs on 2 steady legs and waited. The broken leg had healed weeks ago. The confused old man had never existed. Everything Victor thought he knew about his target was wrong. I walked down the stairs without making an effort to be quiet. When I reached the study doorway, Victor was at my desk, rifling through the filing cabinet where I used to keep my case documents. Looking for something, Victor. He spun around. His face went through several expressions as he processed what he was seeing. Me standing without support. Me fully alert at midnight. Me watching him with the calm patience of someone who had been expecting this visit. Warren, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding. I spent 35 years listening to people explain their misunderstandings. The ones who were innocent never broke into houses at night to destroy evidence. You do not understand what you have done. His voice had an edge of desperation now. You do not understand what is going to happen. I understand exactly what I have done. I stepped into the study and leaned against the doorframe. I reported your logistics front to the Tax Enforcement Division a month ago. The forged guardianship documents are already in federal evidence. There is nothing left for you to destroy, Victor. It is over. The back door opened again. Deputy Dale Miller stepped through with his hand on his holster. 44 years old, 15 years with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, and absolutely no interest in whatever explanation Victor was about to attempt. I had called him an hour ago when I first heard Victor's truck pull into the driveway. Victor Stanton. Deputy Miller said you are under arrest for breaking and entering. You have the right to remain silent. Victor looked at me. He looked at the deputy. He looked around the study at the house he had spent 2 years trying to steal. Then his shoulders dropped, and he put his hands behind his back without being asked. Deputy Miller led Victor out in handcuffs. I watched from the porch as the patrol car's lights disappeared down Folly Road. Elena appeared beside me, silent, watching her husband driven away into the night. The darkness settled around us. Tomorrow, Victor would face federal charges. Tomorrow, his attorney would begin negotiating whatever deal might be possible. But tonight, there was one more thing to settle. Victor would have to sign away every claim to Blackwood Estate, or the federal prosecutor would add the forged guardianship documents to the existing charges. The man who tried to steal my home was about to sign a document giving up all rights to it, and I was going to watch. The Charleston County Detention Center smelled like industrial cleaner and regret. Victor sat across the metal table in an orange jumpsuit, his manicured hands now raw from 24 hours without moisturizer. Margot Sinclair laid the settlement documents between them. 3 pages. Total waiver of all claims to Blackwood Estate. I watched through the observation window as Victor's eyes scanned the words. His face had the particular grayness of a man who had finally understood the size of his mistake. Margot's voice carried through the speaker. Sign here, here, and here. Initial each page. This waives all claims past, present, and future to the Blackwood Estate property. Victor looked up, and the sentencing recommendation. The federal prosecutor will recommend the lower end of guidelines. What you do with that mercy is your business. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. The signature he wrote was small and cramped nothing like the confident flourish he used to use when he signed dinner checks at restaurants where I was expected to pay. Remember when Victor told me to get my own water? That man just signed away every right to the house he tried to steal. Patience, it turns out, is a weapon. It had taken me 3 months to build a case that took him 3 minutes to surrender to. Margot gathered the documents and nodded to me through the glass. It was done. Blackwood Estate was protected by a revocable living trust, and now the only person who had ever tried to claim it had signed away every legal avenue he might have pursued. Victor would face federal charges for the financial fraud. The breaking and entering charge from Deputy Miller would add to his troubles. But the house, my grandfather's house, was safe. That afternoon I sat in the kitchen at Blackwood Estate with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Elena appeared in the doorway with 2 fresh cups. She set one in front of me and sat down across the table. The same kitchen where she had stayed silent while Victor told me to get my own water. The same table where Victor had presented his power of attorney documents. The same room where so much had gone wrong. Now it was just the 2 of us, and the only thing between us was honesty. I should have seen it, Dad. Elena's voice was quiet but steady. All those years, the way he talked about the house, the way he looked at you. He was good at what he did, sweetheart. Con men always are. That is why they are dangerous. I stayed silent. When he told you to get your own water, when he talked about putting you in a facility, I just sat there. How many mornings had I sat in this kitchen pretending to forget where I put my glasses while Victor calculated his next move? Now, Elena sat across from me, and the only thing between us was the truth we had both been avoiding. "You're speaking now," I said. "That is what matters." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm the way her mother's used to be when she had something important to say. "I'm not going anywhere, Dad, and neither is this house." I squeezed her hand back. We sat like that for a while, the morning light coming through the windows, the coffee growing cold, the silence comfortable for the first time in years. That evening I sat alone on the back porch. The April air was warm and carried the smell of jasmine from the garden my wife had planted 20 years ago. The oak trees my grandfather had planted swayed in the breeze, their branches heavy with Spanish moss. They had survived hurricanes and droughts and 100 Charleston summers. This house had survived something worse, a man who smiled while he poisoned. I thought about the months of performance, the pills I had palmed and flushed down the toilet, the glasses I had deliberately misplaced, the questions I had asked twice on purpose, watching Victor's satisfaction grow as he believed his plan was working. It had been exhausting playing the confused old man while building a case that would end him, but it had worked. The house was protected. The trust was filed. Elena was healing. Victor would spend years contemplating the cost of his greed from a federal facility. I went inside and walked to my study. The room was quiet, the evening light fading through the windows. I opened the desk drawer and took out my vintage Mont Blanc pen. My father had given it to me the day I became a senior inspector at National Maritime Insurance 31 years ago. "Use it to protect people from those who would take what is not theirs," he had said. I had used it to sign hundreds of fraud reports over the years. I had used it to document schemes and expose liars and protect people who did not even know they were being targeted. Now I understood what he really meant. I wound the pen slowly, feeling the familiar weight in my palm. The mechanism clicked softly, a sound I had heard thousands of times. My father had been a claims adjuster before me. His father had built this house. 3 generations of Lockwoods protecting what mattered. Some things once properly secured stay secured. I set the pen down on my desk and looked out at the April stars emerging above the oak trees. Tomorrow I would teach Elena how to read a financial statement, how to spot the signs of manipulation in a contract, how to protect herself from the Victor Stantons of the world. Some lessons, it seemed, were worth passing on. The house settled around me, the familiar creaks and groans of a structure that had sheltered my family for 7 decades. My leg had healed. My mind had never been clouded. And the man who had tried to take everything from me had signed away his last claim to any of it. I turned off the study lamp and walked upstairs to bed. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of schemes or supplements or signatures. Blackwood Estate was secure, and so was I. I look back on everything that happened in my own home, and I have to admit something uncomfortable. I saw the signs long before I chose to act. That is the danger of family betrayal. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, wrapped in familiarity. I told myself I was being cautious, patient, understanding. In reality, I was allowing family betrayal to grow unchecked under my own roof. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this: do not ignore what your instincts are trying to protect you from. Family justice is not about revenge. It is about clarity, boundaries, and the courage to act before it's too late. I waited longer than I should have, and I nearly lost everything because of it. No one prepares you for family betrayal, especially when it comes from someone you welcomed into your life. My belief is simple now: protect what matters early. Document everything. Ask questions. Trust actions more than words. Because when the time comes, family justice will not protect you unless you first protect yourself. And in moments like these, I believe God allows trials not to break us, but to reveal what must be seen. That is how I found my path back to family justice. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I truly appreciate you being here until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you were in Warren's position facing that kind of betrayal? Share your perspective in the comments. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future stories. Just a quick note. While inspired by a property dispute within a multi-generational household, Some elements have been dramatized for storytelling. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better match your interests.